Hey, how's it going, AP World? We have Chapter 19 ready for you. Let's get going. When we're going to start off with Chapter 19, two very important books played a key role in abolitionism and upsetting the South in terms of getting rid of their slaves. And the first one is Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And this book was translated into more than 20 languages worldwide. She lived in Cincinnati, in case you didn't know, from 1832 to 1850. And this helped thousands of Northerners join the cause of abolitionism because they read this book. Finally, they have a name to a face, and they jump on board of the abolitionist movement. And many of these people decide after reading her book that they're going to refuse to help with the newly strict fugitive slave law, which is part of the Compromise of 1850. If you're stuck on that, go back and review Chapter 18, the Compromise of 1850. Very important stuff. And when we get into the Civil War, we'll see this book also helps keep France and England from siding with the South because many French and English read the book and couldn't believe just how terrible slavery really was. Another very important abolitionist book, but for different reasons, is called The Impending Crisis of the South. And this is written by this guy Helper here. And his message is much different. He says that the ones who are truly hurt by slavery are non-slaveholding whites. So 3 out of 4 white people living in the South, he says, are hurt. And the reason why is because slavery takes away jobs from whites. And both of these books are banned and burned in the South. Let's go to Kansas. Last chapter we talked about the KansasNebraska Act. Now remember, there's this unspoken agreement, even though there will be popular sovereignty, that Kansas would be slave and Nebraska would be free. However, due to popular sovereignty, and remember this is Stephen Douglas's act, the KansasNebraska Act, people living in the territories got to decide. So because they get to vote, we have pro and slavery forces coming out in full force. We have people moving from all over the country, especially in surrounding states, to vote. The Shawnee Mission is a slavery puppet government, and this was a government that was set up to promote slavery. There is also a town of Lawrence, Kansas, which is burned to the ground, and this is where a bunch of free soil or anti-slavery people lived. And this, days later, after couple weeks after Lawrence is burned down, we have Pottawatomi Creek, which is also located in Kansas, and this is led by John Brown. This is the first, he and his sons, he had about 20 children throughout the course of his life, and a bunch of people, they moved to Kansas, and they kill 5 pro-slavery individuals, and they hack them to pieces with swords. Very violent there, and this leads to massive retaliation in Kansas, and again, the name Bleeding Kansas because there is a mini civil war going on there. Okay, the government in Kansas, the proposed constitution is called the Lecompton Constitution. Now, individuals in Kansas could vote for the Constitution with or without slavery. And it says here the Free Soilers refused to vote, and President Buchanan supported the Constitution. Let's talk about why the Free Soilers refused to vote. You could vote for the Constitution with slavery, or you could vote for the Constitution without slavery. If you voted for the Constitution without slavery, any slaves that were already in Kansas would be protected, and they could stay slaves living in Kansas. So even though you could vote for it without, there still would be slavery. The Free Soilers and the anti-slavery people were very upset with this and did not want to vote for it, so they refused because of all the fighting and all the nonsense going on. Kansas is not. Charles Sumner, he is a leading abolitionist from the North, and he goes on a rant and he badmouths lot of stuff in the South, particularly South Carolina. Butler has a distant cousin who is a congressman by the name of Preston Brooks. He's younger and he is furious. He is also from South Carolina. He cannot believe that Charles Sumner is talking all this trash. So one day he goes into Charles Sumner's desk and just absolutely starts beating him with a cane so badly that the cane that's made out of gold breaks off. Sumner is severely injured. He has to go to Europe for several years to get treatment. And here is a very famous cartoon. The significance of this is that it shows the high tensions in Congress over the slavery issue. Okay, election of 1856. We have James Buchanan, who was a Democrat, and he is nominated because he's not involved with the KansasNebraska Act. Republicans nominate a guy by the name of John C. Fremont, and he's nominated for the same reasons. And we have the Know Nothing Party, which is a nativist party, which is anti-immigrants. I can't stress enough. I'd be shocked if you don't see that on your AP exam in May. That Know Nothings are nativists. They don't like immigrants and they don't like foreigners. They nominated former President Millard Fillmore, who was the one who signed the Compromise of 1850. Now, the important thing to know from this election is Buchanan wins, and part of why he wins is a bunch of fire eaters, or people from the South that threatened to secede, came out and said, if a Republican wins, they will secede. They will break away. So a lot of people were afraid to vote for Republican for fear that this would contribute to disunion. 1857, let's talk about Dred Scott. Dred Scott was a slave. He lived in free territories of Illinois and Wisconsin. Here's Dred Scott. And when his owner died, he sued for his freedom. Goes to Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, who was appointed by Andrew Jackson, wrote the majority opinion. And here's Roger B. Taney, and he looks like a wet dog. Come on, you know you can picture him. Golden Retriever? Maybe? And this is what he says: slaves are not citizens and they cannot sue. This is very similar to Cherokee versus Georgia, in which John Marshall said Native Americans are not citizens and cannot sue. He takes it a step further and says slaves are property and they cannot be taken away without due process. That's what the Fifth Amendment says, that life, liberty, and property cannot be taken away without due process of law. And most importantly, the Missouri Compromise is declared unconstitutional because Congress cannot legislate slavery in the territory. So that magical 3630 line is overturned. And Henry Clay, the creator of the Missouri Compromise, if he were alive, he'd say something like, Roger, why are you ruling my compromise unconstitutional, bro? Okay, the crash of 1857. Remember, all panics, all crashes are caused by over speculation. In this case, it's land again. And also we have a bunch of gold from California, which is going to lead to inflation. We have overproduction of grain. It's going to hit the North the hardest. Without question, the North was hardest hit and the South was barely affected. Cotton was not affected much at all. So this leads for the South to think they are stronger economically than the North and that it wouldn't be that bad if they were to break away. In 1857, prior to the crash, there was a tariff that lowered the rates to 20%. This was the lowest that they'd been in roughly 45 years. So some people thought that lower tariffs helped cause this crash. All right, Lincoln and Douglas, 1858, they are running for a Senate seat in Illinois. And Lincoln challenges Douglas to 7 different debates. And there's a very famous doctrine called the Freeport Doctrine. At one of these 7 debates, Lincoln asks a question to Douglas. This is after the Dred Scott decision. Could a territory vote down slavery despite the Dred Scott decision? Basically, Lincoln is saying, can a territory overturn the Supreme Court's decision? Douglas says, yes, they could if they want to pass laws that limit slavery. And this freaks everybody out in the South. The South cannot believe that Stephen Douglas would say something that would go against the Supreme Court, and this leads to a split in sectional lines of the Democratic Party. Stephen Douglas is popular in the North and the South. The Southern Democrats will not follow him. The impact of the Freeport Doctrine is it guarantees a Republican will win in 1860 because the Democratic Party is split. All right, John Brown. We're visiting John Brown again, 1859, something called Harper's Ferry. There should not be an apostrophe there, believe it or not. John Brown and his followers, they're back this time in Virginia, and they seize a federal arsenal, the second largest arsenal with guns in the entire nation. And they kill 7 innocent people in the process. The goal of this was to encourage a massive slave rebellion. And here's John Brown much later in life. He's 59 years old here. This is a few days before he is killed. He is captured and he is held in prison while he has a trial. And believe it or not, one of the people that guarded him was John Wilkes Booth. And Brown is convicted of murder and treason, and he is later hanged with his followers. And the effects of this raid, you need to know these effects, very important. He becomes a martyr in the North to abolitionists. Now, keep in mind, most people in the North did not agree with what John Brown did, but there were a select few abolitionists that definitely did. The South becomes very fearful of future attacks. They think that the North is just nothing but conspiring against them, and future attacks will happen. And this is a major immediate cause of disunion. One other thing to note, Abe Lincoln, who is going to be the president in a little more than a year, he distanced himself from John Brown. He did not want to be associated with John Brown. No politicians really did because he was so extreme. All right, let's go to 1860. Democrats are split, as I talked about. The Northerners favor Douglas. The Southerners view him as a traitor because he's going against the Supreme Court and he said slavery could be voted down. John C. Breckinridge, he is selected as the candidate from the South for the Democrats. And he favored extension of slavery into territories and he favored the annexation of Cuba. Remember, Cuba was to be annexed according to the Ostend Manifesto. The Ostend Manifesto encouraged the U.S. to buy it from Spain, and if they refused, then they would take it by force. And that did not happen because it was blocked by Free Soilers. And then we had another party, the Constitutional Union Party, and they wanted to elect a compromise candidate. So the whole purpose of this party is to try to save the Union. Lincoln wins. He is a minority president, meaning he only won 40% of the popular vote. 60%, 6 out of 10 Americans voted for somebody else. He is a sectional president, and he was not on a ballot in 10 southern states. South Carolina beforehand said, if Lincoln wins, if a Republican wins, we will secede. And in 1860 at Charleston, they call a convention, and they do vote to secede. Once they secede, we see a whole bunch of other states follow along with them. And they form the Confederate States of America, and their president is Jefferson Davis. Now, Buchanan, he was a lame duck president until March 1861, meaning he's president after the election but before Lincoln is inaugurated. He's kind of in a tricky situation. He did not believe for a moment that southern states could legally secede, but he also didn't think there was anything he could do about it. So his response was to do nothing. And he did not feel the Constitution gave him any authority to do anything, and the Northern Army was not really prepared at this point. So he basically sat and waited and did absolutely nothing. Now, that is a final last-ditch effort to appease the South. A senator from Kentucky, Crittenden, came up with this Crittenden Amendment or the Crittenden Compromise. Here is the purpose of this amendment. One, it was aimed to appease the South. Two, said slavery in territories was to be prohibited north of the 3630 line. So it's reintroducing the Missouri Compromise now. They're doing this to overturn a court case. Remember, an amendment to the Constitution is one of only two ways you can overturn a court case. The other one is to have another Supreme Court case. South of that line, any existing territory or anything that could possibly exist, for example, Cuba. If Cuba was to be taken over 50 years later, slavery would be guaranteed there because it's south of that 3630 line. So this would extend 3630 indefinitely. Any future territories above this that would enter the Union would be free. Any future territories below this that would enter the Union would be slave. And Lincoln did not support this. He said, I ran on a platform of non-extension of slavery. So he was not going to go back on that, and he flatly rejected this and did not support it, and this never even passed. But this was a last effort proposal. All right, that is it for Chapter 19. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, leave them in the comments. I hope this helped. Have a good day, guys.